This episode is presented to you in the form of an audiobook. Your life could be completely different if you could just finish the important things you start, but most people never figure out why they keep giving up. Psychologist and human performance researcher Peter Hollins explains that the ability to follow through and finish what you start is the single most important skill for creating the life you actually want instead of settling for what you currently have. In his book titled Finish What You Start, he breaks down the psychology and science behind why we abandon our goals and provides a step-by-step system for developing the mental habits that turn your intentions into reality. This matters because every unfinished project represents a missed opportunity to grow, learn, and move closer to your ideal life. In this episode, you'll learn the 4 essential elements that make finishing anything possible, how to identify and overcome the mental roadblocks that keep you stuck, and the specific mindsets and strategies that separate people who follow through from those who give up. The benefit of mastering this is simple. You'll finally have the tools to complete what matters most to you and stop living with the frustration of endless unfinished business. So what's really happening when you start something with excitement but can't push through to the end? The first thing to understand is what Peter Hollins calls the 4 pillars of following through. When most people think about finishing what they start, they automatically focus on willpower or motivation, but that's actually missing the bigger picture. Peter Hollins discovered that the ability to follow through is built on 4 specific pillars that must work together. These 4 pillars are focus, self-discipline, action, and persistence. Each one is equally important, and if any of them is weak, the whole structure falls apart and your project collapses. Think about focus first. This isn't just about concentrating during work time, though that's a big part of it. Real focus means being able to direct your attention to what matters most without getting pulled in different directions by every shiny new opportunity that comes along. Let's say your goal is to write a book. True focus means saying no to starting a podcast, launching a side business, or taking on freelance projects until that book is finished, even when those new ideas seem exciting and potentially profitable. When you have real focus, you develop the ability to say no to things that don't serve your main goals, even when those things feel appealing in the moment. Self-discipline is different from what most people imagine. It's not about forcing yourself through pain or suffering like some kind of productivity masochist. Instead, it's about creating systems and habits that make the right choices easier than the wrong ones. Think about someone who wants to exercise regularly. Instead of relying on motivation every morning and hoping they'll feel like working out, they schedule gym time like any other important appointment and create a routine that removes the decision-making from the equation entirely. When you have self-discipline, you don't need motivation to carry you through difficult periods because you've built routines that keep you moving forward, even when the initial excitement wears off. Action is simply your willingness to start and keep moving, even when you don't have all the answers figured out in advance. Most people get stuck in what we might call planning purgatory because they want everything to be perfect before they begin. Imagine someone who wants to start a YouTube channel but spends months researching equipment, studying other creators, analyzing algorithms, and planning content without ever recording a single video. They can plan all they want, but until they are ready to take action, then that YouTube channel will never have its first published video. And here's what's interesting about action. It creates momentum, and momentum makes everything else easier. When you take action consistently, you learn by doing instead of trying to figure everything out in your head first, which is usually impossible anyway. Persistence is what keeps you going when things inevitably get difficult or uncomfortable. But it's not about grinding through problems with brute force. Real persistence means having the mental flexibility to adjust your approach while staying committed to your end goal. For instance, if you're learning a new language and flashcards aren't working for you, persistence means trying conversation practice, immersion techniques, or language exchange apps, rather than giving up entirely because one method didn't work. When you have persistence, obstacles become useful information that helps you find better ways forward instead of evidence that you should quit. The reason these 4 pillars matter so much is that they address different aspects of what it actually takes to complete something meaningful. Focus keeps you on the right track when distractions try to pull you away. Self-discipline keeps you moving when motivation naturally fades. Action gets you started and builds the momentum you need to continue. And persistence carries you through the inevitable challenges and setbacks that every worthwhile project contains. Without all 4 working together, you'll find yourself getting stuck at different points in any project you attempt. And you'll never quite understand why you keep running into the same problems over and over again. Now that we understand the 4 pillars of following through, Hollins explains that there are specific mental roadblocks that prevent most people from developing these abilities. He divides these roadblocks into 2 categories: inhibiting tactics and psychological barriers. And understanding both is crucial because they work in different ways to sabotage your follow-through. Inhibiting tactics are the ways you plan against yourself without even realizing it. Hollins says these are the subtle decisions you make that set you up for failure before you even start. For example, you might set goals that are too vague to measure, or you might try to change too many things at once, or you might choose to work on important projects when you're already tired or distracted. These tactics feel like normal planning, but they actually make completion much harder. He points out that inhibiting tactics often come from a part of your mind that wants to protect you from the discomfort of real effort or potential failure. By setting unclear goals or overwhelming yourself with too much at once, you create built-in excuses for why things don't work out. This lets you avoid the psychological risk of really trying and possibly falling short. Psychological barriers, on the other hand, are deeper mental patterns that create resistance to following through. Hollins identifies several key ones: fear of failure, perfectionism, lack of clear goals, low self-confidence, and lack of motivation. These barriers create emotional friction that makes every step feel harder than it should. Fear of failure shows up as procrastination or endless preparation without action. When you're afraid of failing, starting feels dangerous because it opens up the possibility of proving you're not as capable as you hoped. Perfectionism creates a different problem, where nothing you do ever feels good enough to be considered finished. You keep tweaking and adjusting instead of moving forward because the current version doesn't match the perfect image in your head. Lack of clear goals means you don't have a specific target to aim for, so you can't tell if you're making progress or if you've actually succeeded. This creates confusion and makes it easy to get distracted by other things that seem more urgent or interesting. Low self-confidence makes you doubt whether you're capable of finishing anything meaningful, which drains your energy and makes you more likely to give up when things get challenging. Hollins emphasizes that these barriers aren't character flaws or permanent limitations. They're learned patterns that developed for reasons that might have made sense at some point in your life. The important thing is recognizing them when they show up, so you can address them directly instead of letting them run your decisions from the background. Building on our understanding of these roadblocks, Hollins explains that developing the right mindsets is what allows you to work through mental barriers instead of being stopped by them. He outlines 4 specific mindsets that successful finishers use to maintain momentum even when things get difficult. The first mindset is believing that everything you do is worthwhile. Hollins says this doesn't mean pretending every task is exciting or meaningful. It means understanding that when you follow through on commitments to yourself, you build trust in your own capabilities. Every time you finish something, even something small, you prove to yourself that you can be relied upon. This creates a positive cycle where completing tasks becomes easier because you expect yourself to follow through. The second mindset is becoming comfortable with discomfort. Hollins points out that everything worth doing will have elements that feel uncomfortable, uncertain, or challenging. Most people try to avoid these feelings, but successful finishers learn to see discomfort as normal rather than as a sign that something is wrong. When you expect discomfort and accept it as part of the process, it doesn't have the power to derail your progress. He explains that discomfort is often just your fear instinct responding to unfamiliar territory. Your brain is trying to keep you safe by encouraging you to stick with what you know. But growth and achievement require moving into unfamiliar territory, which means learning to function effectively while experiencing some level of discomfort. The third mindset is understanding that real learning only happens when you complete things. He says you can plan and prepare and study all you want, but you don't actually know what works until you follow through to the end. Only when you finish something can you look back and evaluate your performance objectively. You can see what strategies worked, what assumptions were wrong, and what you need to adjust next time. This mindset transforms challenges and mistakes from evidence that you should quit into valuable information that helps you improve. When you adopt a learning mindset, every project becomes an experiment that teaches you something useful, regardless of the specific outcome. The fourth mindset is recognizing how stress and anxiety undermine your ability to follow through. He emphasizes that being in a poor mood or high-stress state makes everything harder. When you're stressed, your brain prioritizes immediate concerns over long-term goals, which makes it much more difficult to maintain focus and persistence. This is why managing your mental and emotional state isn't separate from productivity. It's a core requirement for sustained performance. Successful finishers build stress-reducing habits into their routines because they understand that protecting their mental state protects their ability to follow through. Finally, Hollins addresses the question of how to maintain motivation over time, especially for long-term projects where the excitement naturally fades. He explains that most people think about motivation wrong. They treat it like something that should appear automatically. But sustainable motivation is actually something you build through specific strategies. The key insight is learning to make productive action pleasurable in the moment rather than only focusing on future rewards. He says your brain is constantly weighing short-term pleasure against long-term benefits, and short-term pleasure usually wins. But if you can find ways to make the work itself satisfying, you eliminate this internal conflict. One way to do this is through what he calls temptation bundling, where you pair something you need to do with something you enjoy. For example, you might listen to your favorite podcast only while exercising, or work on your most important project in your favorite coffee shop. This creates positive associations with the work itself, rather than relying purely on willpower. Another approach is focusing on the process rather than just the outcome. He explains that outcomes are often outside your direct control, but you always have control over your effort and approach. When you learn to find satisfaction in executing good process, you become less dependent on external results for motivation. Internal motivation is always more powerful than external pressure. Hollins suggests regularly asking yourself questions that connect your daily actions to your deeper values and long-term vision. Questions like, how will completing this help me become the person I want to be? What will I learn from following through? How will this experience prepare me for bigger challenges? The answers to these questions remind you why the work matters to you personally, which is much more motivating than external pressure or expectations from other people. He also emphasizes the importance of considering your life in its totality rather than just the immediate present. When you're tempted to stop working or give in to distraction, pause and think about how you'll feel about that decision later. This helps you make choices based on your long-term priorities, rather than just whatever feels good right now. The final element of sustainable motivation is building systems that make progress visible. Hollins says you need concrete evidence that your efforts are moving you forward, especially during the middle phases of long projects where progress can feel slow or unclear. This might mean tracking daily actions, celebrating small wins, or regularly reviewing what you've accomplished. When you can see that your efforts are adding up to something meaningful, it becomes much easier to maintain momentum through the inevitable periods when motivation feels low. The goal is creating a system where following through becomes a natural expression of who you are, rather than something you have to force yourself to do. So, to quickly recap, the difference between people who finish what they start and those who don't isn't talent or luck. It's understanding that completion requires 4 specific pillars working together: focus, self-discipline, action, and persistence. Most people fail because they're unknowingly sabotaging themselves through inhibiting tactics like setting vague goals or trying to change everything at once. The solution is developing 4 essential mindsets: believing your efforts are worthwhile, becoming comfortable with discomfort, understanding that real learning only happens through completion, and managing stress because poor mental states destroy your ability to persist. Finally, you build sustainable motivation by making the work itself pleasurable through temptation bundling, focusing on process rather than just outcomes, connecting daily actions to your deeper values, and creating systems that make your progress visible so you can see your efforts adding up over time. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think in the comments.